Honestly, speaking of Bill, checking out and watching the Dynasty, I thought it was so cool. And we talked about it before we got on air a little bit. Watching the beginning part of the Dynasty documentary, I wasn't a part of that. So that was all like watching from a fan, but also watching and knowing like my time in New England, we always looked up to what you guys did before us. And we were also very envious. We were like, man, we got to do that. We got to catch those guys. And Bill will remind us all the time. Anytime you did something, he will remind you, well, Rodney didn't do that. Willie McGinnis didn't do that. You think Teddy Brucey, these guys just compete drinking water. Like we heard all of the stories. And then I got there with Vince Wilfork. He would tell me Ty Law stories or different things. So we always, as this young core, was like, man, how do we catch these guys? How do we do what they did? And very fortunate I got to play with Brady and Vince and those guys that tapped into the guys before us and spread all of the things that they learned from you guys. But what did you think, watching the Patriots documentary and just living back in those memories?
Well, to be honest with you, I watched the first one and I watched a little bit of the second, and I hadn't watched any since. And I felt like when I was watching it, I know about the Spygate and all that stuff, but it just seemed so Tom and Bill centric and
So
Kraft.
negative.
I didn't enjoy it. I stopped because it didn't tell the stories like of me coming and Corey Dillon. And, it was centered around some things that I wasn't really feeling. And I just stopped watching. I mean, I interviewed for 5 or 6 hours. I was in New York, and all they had me saying was, "Mom." Like, that's it. That's all I saw myself say. Like, I have a lot of input into Tom and how these guys treated me and the things that happened that led to me signing here. That was a big deal. I wasn't a big fan of it.
So somebody asked me about my takeaway. And that was my biggest takeaway. I felt like I got kind of duped because I was just like you. I did like 4 or 5 hours in New York, and then I did another like 2 or 3 hours in Massachusetts. And I was like, man, this is going to be great. Like the storytelling, we're talking about this and we're talking about that. And then I watched and I was just like, man, like only things I said that could come across as negative towards Bill was the only thing. Like, I mean, I had different kind of quick sentences on things, but the longest thing I talked about was 2016 with Trump and the letter and everything. And I thought that was probably the worst part, that everything that we all gave to the 20 years that it encompassed, they only hit anything that was negative. I thought 2010 was like a changing of the guard for so many different things with New England. Like some of the older players were gone, and it was just like every move had to be made right to try to move on. And the only thing they talked about was Aaron Hernandez. All he talked about was Chico. And I just thought, like you said, missed a lot of the great stories. Even like to me, you talk about Bill and everything with Trump. Bill was a big reason we helped a guy get released from prison after 28 years in prison. He was one of the first people after I read and told everybody about this story. He raised his hand and he said, how do we help? He said, I'm willing to sign my name on a letter that goes in the governor. And you know the impact of Bill Belichick's name on anything in Massachusetts. And I thought that shows so much growth and change of how he saw things outside of football compared to years before. And it was just like, well, that'll make him look good, so we're not going to include that. So I thought that was some of the things of like, hey, we won at a high level and guys stayed there. Like I could have left 2 times. I signed back. There's reasons why.
And the thing too, Bill was a hell of a coach. Like they act like the last 3 or 4 years, because the Patriots have struggled, that Bill can't coach. You give me one game and you give me Bill X's and O's, I'll take him over anybody. All right? Because he's going to make sure that you're prepared. And I just didn't like the way that he was made out. Yeah, Bill made some mistakes and he wasn't always the nicest or the purest guy. But at the end of the day, he always did whatever he had to do to make the team better. And he always treated me fair. I felt like he treated other players fair. He always wanted open competition. And to make a documentary like that and to just absolutely kind of kill who he is and the opportunities. Like, think about this. He gave me an opportunity. a 5th-round draft choice. He gave Tom Brady an opportunity. He set down a $100 million quarterback when no one thought it was popular and started Tom Brady. Okay, Wes Welker, he went out and got him. Julian Edelman, a former quarterback. He gives guys who are the underdog an opportunity. No one talks about that. When everybody else is done with a guy, he brings in a Corey Dillon. He brings in a Randy Moss. He brings in a Rodney Harrison. He goes drafts Devin McCourty. He knows what he was doing back then, and I just don't think that he got enough credit, enough respect, enough props. Man, this dude is the greatest coach of all time. I mean, to be able to handle that many personalities, to be able to deal with Tom, handle a young star quarterback, another $100 million quarterback, it was a lot going on. And trust me, I'm happy that I wasn't Bill Belichick back then, but he had to make some tough decisions, and everybody's not going to like it.
So true. And one of the bigger names, too, Malcolm Butler was, forget undrafted free agent, he was a tryout guy. Like, he came on these random tryout days. So that for the head coach to even show up and fully be into watching a bunch of guys that probably had no shot at playing the NFL except for this one guy, and he ends up a Pro Bowl player, an All-Pro player, and one of the biggest plays in Super Bowl history. And I agree with you. It just wasn't. They didn't dwell on it. The only time I felt like you really understood the X's and O's of coaching is when they showed Super Bowl 53 and they showed what we were able to do to the Rams defense. Was the only time that I think from the outside looking in, you were like, oh, wow, like he really thought of doing all of this. Other than that, it was just about management and all the other nonsense. But
hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.